Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. You can see that I am trying to figure out a way to start this podcast that is not awkward, and I am not succeeding. I'm here with Amber Reynolds and Rencel Jones, as always. And today we're talking about competition, we're talking about market saturation, and in particular, we're talking about this idea that I don't think that the market is saturated for whatever you do. I don't think that any market is saturated. I think that the market is saturated for fitness and for nutrition and stuff like that if you act the same way as everybody else. But I think there is tremendous opportunity if you don't. So we're going to talk about that today. When you were not aware of this topic, Amber, you were aware of this talk about 2 minutes ago, but I know both of you think a lot about this. So I'm excited to hear your input as well. I'll start it off with a quote. And this quote comes from Earl Nightingale. If you've ever listened to his tapes, legendary radio host. This was published in 1976. I definitely recommend you listen to some of his tapes. They're good. And the thing about the self-development genre is that it's basically just a reworking and rewashing of everything that's already been said because there's nothing new in it. And so I like going back to the source on this stuff and then coming to my own conclusions versus somebody else's fancy acronym or whatever they decide about it. Anyway, here's the quote. Earl Nightingale in 1976 said, "The money we receive will always be in a direct ratio to the demand of what we do, our ability to do it, and the difficulty in replacing us." That last bit is the key bit. The difficulty in replacing us. Now, the difficulty in replacing us doesn't have to be an actual tangible difficulty. There's probably a lot of people who can help somebody with their habits on nutrition or build a workout plan. But it's the perception of whether you can be replaced or not. It's how specifically you appeal to that person in their mind is what it comes down to in terms of you becoming the obvious choice in their idea and how hard it is for them to replace you and kind of like live their life without you. It doesn't mean that you're not helping them become self-sufficient and take care of their own bodies. You absolutely are. But if it feels like you're perfect for somebody, it also feels like anybody else is not quite perfect for them. And even if they go hire somebody else, they think about you and say, "Oh, I remember that time that I worked with Amber. You know, that was amazing. She really got me." And I've experienced this with coaches that I've worked with. I remember there was one guy. His name's Mike Demeter. I'll use his real name because I'm saying good stuff about him. And his name is Mike Demeter. He's a coach in Toronto. You probably have never heard about him, but people kind of in the know in the like physique community, this dude is a legend. He'll put more people on stage than anybody else in most physique bodybuilding shows. And he happens to work in Toronto, and he works out of a big box gym in Toronto. Oh my God, right? This guy's been doing this for like 30 years, and he still works at big box gym. How could he? And it's just like they leave him alone, but they take care of all the annoying shit so that he can train people, and he makes a few $100,000 a year. So like working in a big box gym, if you have your own clientele, is actually not the worst idea. And he's proof of that. Dean Somerset, also at Edmonton, is a good example of somebody who's written about this quite a bit. And so I went to train with Mike because Mike is somebody who was training back with like Vince Gironda in the golden era days. It was super cool. He's somebody who understands physique and proportions in ways that I feel like it's almost like a lost art. It's not just putting on more muscle. It's like, how can we take this body the way that it naturally is and make it look as good as possible by pulling out the attributes and downplaying a lot of the negatives. And so I remember when I first went into his office, he said, "Okay, strip down to your underwear and turn around." and I was like, "You're the boss." So I did. And then
so many jokes.
Yeah, so many jokes. But I did, and it was really neat because he took he took a good look, kind of up and down, and measured proportions a whole bunch of different ways.
But he did.
And then he did. But the training was unlike anything that I had ever experienced before. It for example, one of the things that he noticed with me, he's like, naturally you've got wider shoulders and like a thinner waist, so that's great. Like that's the Adonis. If you ever know this, like the Adonis triangle, the proportions, we can pull that out. Adonis?
Same thing.
Adonis.
Potato.
Oh, Canadians.
Potato.
About a boot.
It's not a
whichever.
Canadian thing.
Oh, okay.
It's a John Goodman doesn't know how to say words because John Goodman reads books. He doesn't talk to other people. Problem.
I'd rather make fun of Canadians.
It's not a Canadian problem. But there was a lot of upper chest work. There was a lot of lateral shoulder work, and it was stuff like there'd be a dip, and it's called the Gironda dip, which basically you're like hands turned out so your palms are facing down, and the base of your wrist is facing each other on the dip, and you're leaning all the way forward. So it's just like pure upper chest, and it was a 24-second rep. It was 3 pauses of 8 seconds as a negative. Stuff like that. And I'll tell you, I mean, after a few months of training with them, I've never looked better. And that's just an example of like, this dude does what he does. You know what I'm saying? And there's no competition for what he does. And I've experienced that, and I've hired a lot of trainers before him. I've hired a lot of trainers since, and nobody's been able to replicate what he does. In my mind, if I ever want to really optimize my physique, he's the only choice. He's the obvious choice. Anyway, we'll get back to this. So basically, the obvious statement here is to make more money, you've got to give somebody a reason to spend more money on you and not to spend it on somebody else. But that's obvious. In theory, it is. But then why do so many people who work in health and fitness fail to understand the single most important strategic decision that they're going to make in their business? Being a good enough practitioner should earn you a good enough living. And in most cases, it does. You know, you might work for somebody else, totally fine. In most cases, it does. But to get ahead, you need to differentiate yourself. You need to position your product, your service, whatever it is that you do in a way that makes things easier for you. And this type of positioning, I think, is at the core of explaining why some trainers struggle for attention while others have this just like fire hose of leads. Like they can't handle enough. Like their problem is they can't find people to service their clients. It's this weird, almost developing world economy, if you're familiar with how that's often structured. It's not that everybody in some countries that are, you know, coming up and developing, it's not that everybody there is poor. It's that there are some people that are just outrageously rich. Most people are very poor, and there's effectively no middle class. That's kind of what our industry is, isn't it? And the kind of knee-jerk reaction is this crazy, like, over-reliance on sales copy or content or paid advertising with, I won't even call it lower than acceptable returns. I'll call it like no returns. And it's all just because of bad positioning. It's not better words that you need. It's not whether you need your reels to look better or worse or anything like that. In fact, anybody who's studied advertising and copywriting a lot agrees and knows that it's often worse looking stuff that performs better.
Less polished.
Pretty does not convert. I mean, we joke about how janky ass my content is. And it's mostly because I just don't know how to design and have zero interest in doing that. But also, I think it's a really good way to communicate ideas. And at the end of the day, the quality of your ideas and the quality of the space you are approaching those ideas from is way more important than how fucking pretty you make those ideas look. And so spending a lot of time on trying to make your stuff look good or the right words to describe a half fleshed out idea, that time is much better spent using maybe worse words or janky content or whatever to communicate a much more fleshed out and unique idea. I was gifted this book years back. It's by this guy named Gene Schwartz, and it's called Breakthrough Advertising. At the time that I was gifted the book was published in 1966. At the time that I was given the book, they were selling for upwards of $900 a pop. And that's if you could find one. This is like one of the advertising tomes. Now somebody bought the rights to it, and they've published new copies of it, so the price has gone down a ton, and you can get them pretty affordably now. But it's called Breakthrough Advertising, and it's kind of known as being like the go-to legendary book on advertising. I'm not necessarily recommending that you read it. It's pretty dense. I mean, if you were an advertising professional, maybe. There was a period where I just read like all of these old school advertising books, and it actually led me down what I would consider to be a negative path. I started focusing too much on old direct mail conversion techniques, on optimizing marketing spend, on again, away from the idea and more on marketing the idea. And it's not that these things say that, but like that's what I was kind of convinced to do. And one of the things that he says in the introduction of the book, he says that great advertisers aren't marketers. He said they're market makers. I'm going to say that again. He says great advertisers aren't marketers, they're market makers. This was true in 1966, and it's true today. I've read books from all these different eras, and they're fascinating because every single one of them talks about the next innovation and the new thing that's coming and how scary it is, and here's what you need to prepare for it. I read a book by Dan Kennedy, who's one of the legends in the sales, advertising, marketing space. And Ultimate Sales Letter is the one that most people read from him, but he's written like 30 books, co-written, whatever. And this was a book that was written just as the internet was coming up. And I read it like a few years ago. and it talked about this new thing called the internet, and how it was going to be disruptive. And what you need to prepare for it is you need to really understand your message and what makes you different better. And you need to optimize the average lifetime value of your customer by building a strong back end and by building a great service to retain your customers longer, so that gives you an advantage to be able to spend more money to acquire customers. It's the same shit. It's literally the same thing as today, except now we're worried about, I don't know, people using AI to create ads faster.
Mm-hmm.
But the solution is actually the same as it always is. So this idea of making a market, it's not advertising. It's identifying an existing trend and then positioning yourself with a fresh appeal in line with that trend. So it's not deceptive in any way, but your goal is to position yourself in a way that stands out from the pack and places the focus on you by perhaps saying the same thing or saying something similar in a kind of different way. There's a big difference between trends and fads. I think trends are really important. I think fads can be ignored. And this is stuff we've spoken about before on this podcast, but perhaps a little bit different language. The difference between a fad and a trend, I'm getting into a lot of like advertising people here, but Al Rise and Jack Trout, 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, Positioning, Battlefield Mind, a whole bunch of like great books in that space. They said a fad is a wave in the ocean and a trend is the tide. A fad gets a lot of hype and a trend gets very little. Like a wave, a fad is very visible, but it goes up and down in a big hurry. Like the tide, a trend is almost invisible, but it's super powerful in the long term. We lived in a house. We lived in this really fancy condo in the Dominican Republic. It's this 5-star resort that we lived in Sosua in the Dominican Republic, which is also the sex tourism capital of the Caribbean. So it was actually a really interesting place to live in, because it wasn't, other places that I've been in that are like big on sex tourism, like some of the islands in Thailand or the Philippines.
Hey, slow down with the locations, John. Slow down. I'm trying to take notes.
We're going to take some notes.
Yeah, I'm trying to write this down. You have any addresses?
Well, the Philippines was a lot of gay men with very, very young boys, actually. It was weird.
Hold up.
Thailand was all like older men with young Thai women. But so Sua, the Dominican Republic, was interesting because it seemed like there was almost an even distribution of like older men and older women with young, attractive people. So you'd see like, yeah, this like 70, 80-year-old like British guy or whatever, just like grabbing ass with this young Dominican girl. But then you'd also see this like 70 or 80-year-old like British woman just grabbing ass with this young Dominican like ripped guy. And so, I don't know, it was like, yeah, shit, this should go both ways. You know what I'm saying?
That's what she said.
If it's gonna exist.
I could do so many interesting cuts of this section.
You could.
I could.
And
I might. We'll see.
So, there's like vendors walking up and down the beach in that area, right? And they're selling the usual. They're selling cigars, little knickknacks. There's a guy who pretends he's selling cigars, but he's actually selling drugs because that's what they all do. And one of them had this box of little blue pills that he was walking up and down the beach. So he's selling whatever it was. Well, I don't think it was Viagra. It was something similar, right? It was penis pills. And so he offered it to me, right? Like I was just like on the beach. So he walked up to me and he offered them to me. And I just pointed at Calvin and I was like, no, man, I'm good. And then we were there for months, which like never happens. And so he kept like coming up to me and he'd like be approaching me to do it. And then he'd look at me and he'd be like, and give me a high five and walk away. It's funny.
You made a human.
Anyway, so we were in this like, yeah, I made a human. I'm good. It works. And so we were in this fancy like condo, and we had to evacuate it. It got destroyed by the ocean overnight. Jeez. It was crazy to be. I've never witnessed anything like this. It was sunny. It wasn't a storm or anything like that. It was sunny, and all of a sudden the tide just started picking up and started like going over the breaker, thing that's supposed to block it, and then it just started creeping closer and closer. And I've never really witnessed just how powerful the ocean is until this moment. I mean, it would rip out concrete reinforced with rebar and just toss this thing 50 meters into the base of our building, smashing glass. I mean, it destroyed this resort. It just annihilated this resort. And we watched these waves every single day for weeks, and we'd be like, ooh, that's a big one. And nobody noticed this tide. And then all of a sudden, as an emergency, we had to evacuate.
Scary.
We had to evacuate. That's how powerful it is. So think about what's going on with this idea of like a fad is a wave, a trend is the tide. If you're following that analogy, we see fads all of the time, don't we? We see all this fancy stuff come up. They're loud, they're exciting, but they come and go. The tide, on the other hand, kind of feels like it sneaks up on you. But goddamn, it's powerful. And where it wants to go, you can't stop it. Nothing could stop it. And so, Lees and Trout also say in the book that I'm pulling this from, they say, a fad is a short-term phenomenon that might be profitable, but a fad doesn't last long enough to do a company much good. It feels like you're doing something when you're matching a trending song to your thing. And you'll be like, oh my God, this video did 500 more views than my previous one. But so what? Right? So what? I actually saw a video. I don't, it's just different approaches. I don't have anything against him, but I don't normally like resonate a lot with Gary Vee's stuff. But I was doom scrolling a little bit before this episode. Not even on the toilet. It was just a bad space. But I was doom scrolling before this episode. And I came across a video of his and somebody asked him, they're like, yo, I'm burnt out. Like I'm burnt out on social media. I'm burnt out on content. And he's like, take some time off. And they were surprised. It's like, yeah, take some time off. She's like, what, a week? He's like, yeah, a week, 2, maybe in a month. She's like, but can I? He's like, everybody has this fear. that if they take time away, it's going to like do something to the algorithm and they'll never be able to come back. He's like, A, it doesn't. B, if you're burnt out, you're going to come back so much stronger afterwards that, yeah, maybe you should take some time off. And I was like, damn, that's actually advice that I kind of jive with.
Anecdotally, I find that after taking a break, that that engagement's actually better. Like after being really consistent and then taking a break and coming back. Like I don't know if that's because it is better or for some other reason, but like when I do take a break, that initial content gets a spike.
I was going to say the exact same thing.
That's why. Yeah.
I was literally waiting.
Just like when you work out, right? Like when you give your body a chance to rest, you come back and you come back even stronger. So again, just anecdotal.
Me on that. I mean, I get the science with working out. I mean, I kind of saw that, I guess, when I basically ignored social media and platform growth for like 2 or 3 years, and then I came back, and it was almost like, oh yeah, like people seem excited to hear from me. I thought that they had all forgotten about me, and I think a lot of them did. Mm-hmm. But when they saw my name again, there was some recognition, and it was novel. Whereas it's not novel anymore because I'm just that idiot who posts every day, rain or shine. But I wonder, with me, it's the routine is so important.
Oh yeah,
that's the part that I struggle with. If I don't write for a few days, or if I don't post on social media, getting back into that routine, because it's very difficult for me. You can tell me if this is the same for you. It's very difficult for me to stop doing something and not immediately fill that space.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've filled that space, and then I have to remove it and open up time again to do the thing that I always knew I was going to come back to.
Yep.
And that's why I every half year just wash my schedule and start over, because I found that there's no way that I can do that over time. And so every 6 months I just eliminate everything possible. Usually it's almost everything, and literally just reprioritize and build my calendar from the ground up. How have you been able to manage that? Like, how have you been able to get, if you take a little bit of time off, let's say posting on Instagram, to use a dumb, meaningless example, just for sake of an example, how have you been able to kind of mitigate that? Like to get back into it and like make it a routine again?
I get excited by the end. That's what you were getting. Well, me and Amber are saying the same thing today. You go ahead, Amber.
I look for inspiration, right? Like I get excited when I learn new things or I see a connection that I haven't seen talked about before. And so I'll purposely look for inspiration. And I do that by consuming either content, books, whatever.
Right.
And whatever I'm learning about
something. Like, do you go to your way to consume something that would be otherwise different from stuff you would consume? Like you look for news sources or novel sources?
My favorite, honestly, is looking up sources around comedy and like stand-up comedy in particular. Because there's just so much that's applicable, like in every area of life, from dealing with hecklers to, how you communicate, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's one of my favorite places to look is that kind of thing, just because I find it so helpful. And you see this kind of connections that you don't normally kind of think about. And you're like, oh, I have to tell everybody how smart I am that I saw this connection, and that makes me want to talk when I feel smart.
I mean, comedians to me are one of, if not the most intelligent group of people.
Have to be.
You have to be, because you have to see the inane, the boring, the normal, and you have to pull out what's funny or unique about it. The difference is that they're able to pull out stuff and laugh at it, but actually they communicate really important ideas by poking fun at them, which is why
that's why Ren's so damn good at what he does.
It's true. It's true. But it's also why it's so dangerous now that line's getting blurred of like what you can say and what you can't say. Like the whole point of being a comedian is there's no line. Our job is to explore where that line is, and we will step over it.
Yeah.
We need permission to step over it because that's the process. The problem is when they step over it, now they get canceled.
Yeah.
And so there's some comedians that have said, screw it. But for the most part, it's created like scared comedy, which sucks.
Historically, the joke is the most important mechanism in comedy. More so than respect, more so than understanding, more so than empathy. You deconstruct everything else, and the sole purpose is the laugh. But I think with a lot of other things, and this speaks to our overall conversation here about carving out your own space. I think like most things, when you carve out your own space, and B, you're excellent only in that space, you can overcome the limitation, whatever the limitation might be. Just being in your lane is just a really great way to solve a lot of problems across life experiences.
So let's talk about that.
You'll always outsmart whatever the situation is if you are fully committed to what you do and not comparing what you do to somebody else.
Let's talk about being in your lane, but also like figuring that out and going with it, because that segues well. Because I think that the most important things that you do are often the simplest and the most obvious, and also the most difficult. Like simple doesn't mean easy, but it does mean straightforward. And so I think the most important things that you can do to set yourself apart to eliminate competition is going to where they are and talking to as many of your ideal prospects as possible, reading the publications they read, following the influencers they follow. Ren talks about that all the time. I mean, he trains mums. He's not a woman or a mom or married or with a mom. Well, I don't know if he's with a mom or not with a mom. Is the girl you with?
I'm not with the mom.
Okay.
But I'm also not a
parent.
Know
something. We just
oh my God, we got information.
Yeah,
yes.
Got that down. It'll change by the next time you ask a question, probably.
Yeah. But he doesn't know that, so he follows people who produce information in that are in that space, right, in order to learn from them. It's not like it's probably not the most fun, entertaining thing he could do in his spare time, but he realizes how important it is to read the publications, to follow the people that he does, and then also attend the social events that they attend, which I think is key. It takes time. It's hard. It's gloriously unsexy. It's not easy, but it is, however, simple. There's a friend of ours who used to be a co-host of the podcast, Carolina Belmares, who, if you scroll back long enough, you'll hear her. She was our co-host, and she charged substantially more than anybody in her town, both for in-person and online training. And her ideal clients are affluent, and so she go to fundraising events. Her clients supported. So if she had a client and they were raising money or something like that, she would like go to a fundraising event with them. She'd go to some fancy schmancy dinner or whatever it was, and she'd get introduced to all of this client's friends at this fundraising event. Pete Dupuis at Crusty Sports Performance does something very, very similar. They train baseball players, and they're known for training baseball players. Well, they've got this big online brand, and they're notable, and they're in all these magazines. You know how they get most of their clients? They go to the kids' baseball game. And they're the only strength and conditioning coach at their, kids' high school baseball game. And the kid is happier than a pig in shit to introduce his coach to all the other kids. What do you think happens? Mm-hmm. Now the whole team's going. That's how they get the majority of their athlete clients, is they go to the kids' baseball game. So once you identify a trend, or once you identify something like this, you've got to kind of make it yours. And the way to do that is to attend events. The way to do that is to maybe even like put your own spin on it, like a new name, a new hook. I don't necessarily like this. There's aspects of marketing and advertising. maybe we could talk about this more in coming episodes. I think it's an important topic. I don't necessarily like that it's the way that it is, but I understand that it's the way that it is. Novelty, newness is always going to gather a crowd. I don't think most new things matter at all. I really don't. I think everything that matters has been figured out. Apple just announced yesterday their like goggles. They're like altered reality goggles. And I took one look at that thing and I'm like, I don't think I have ever seen a product launch where I was less interested in the product. There is so little appeal to me.
Especially for $3,500 for the base model.
I don't even give a shit. It has nothing to do with the money to me. I mean, $3,500.
I know, but even worse because of that.
I don't even think so. I honestly, the price, the reason that they price that way is because they know that a product like this is only going to get purchased by fervent early adopters, and the way to build a new product line out, the way to own a category, is to start very expensive, is to start very premium, because then you hold that space in customers' minds, and then you begin to work backwards. Look at what Tesla did.
Yeah,
Tesla started with a Roadster and then the Model S for $150,000, right? And then they started coming back, but they have that, they own the category because they started expensive. And then that's all that Apple's doing.
Oh, I know.
Like, they know they're not going to sell a lot of units at the beginning. They know it's only going to be for like really crazy early adopters who are going to pay anything. So they want to own the category. But it's just, I don't think that new things matter. I like, there's nothing, human psychology hasn't meaningfully changed in what, half a millennium? Like I've told you funny examples of, you get these Sumerian tablets. The Sumerian population was the first known population to communicate via written communication. And so that's one of the reasons why they were so dominant in their time, is they could actually use it for things like accounting and whatnot. But also, we're now starting to translate a lot of these tablets that are found, and like, the Sumerians were sarcastic assholes. Like, there was just like jokes, there was like sarcastic, witty sayings on these things. Like, it's just, they're humans. Like, this is who we are. Nothing's new about any of this. And so if you understand how humans operate, it's the same thing with social media. Like, nothing new in social media matters. The algorithm changes don't matter. The reason, the way that some Silicon Valley, private company is decided it's best to dict consumers and producers of content today, like, it doesn't matter. It's going to change tomorrow. What matters, if you want to make best use out of it, is to figure out why humans use social media, which is largely driven by selective self-representation. Humans use social media because it is a community, and we are driven by a desire to improve our perceived self-worth and status inside any community that we exist within. We're just naturally inclined to be social climbers. And so everything that we do because we feel like it makes us appear intelligent, intellectual, interesting, attractive, or funny. I call it the IIIAF drug. If you want to know more about this, I wrote an entire book about it called Bionomics. It's the top marketing book in the world when it came out. And I wrote that book, Bionomics, and published it in 2016. And this is a book on social media, and it is more relevant today than it was when I wrote it. Which is because, who cares about the algorithms? What matters is why people use these things. But I know that new is always going to draw a crowd. And so if you want to stand out, you got to market your thing as being new and innovative. I'm not saying that I particularly like it. There also has to be kind of a mass desire there. Gene Schwartz, the author of this book, Breakthrough Advertising, also said to take the hopes, dreams, fears, and desires that already exist in the hearts of millions of people and focus those already existing desires onto a particular product. So the mass desire needs to already be there, which it is for fitness, but not the way a lot of you people, yes, I'm going to generalize, dear listener, not the way a lot of you people are talking. A lot of the way you people are speaking is because you have been negatively influenced by the tiny communities of obsessive personal trainer nerds that you spend all of your time in, and you've become detached with the reality of how the global population thinks about health and fitness.
Mm-hmm.
People join a gym, people sign up for a personal trainer for extrinsic factors. They do it because of how they want to feel like they look. They do it largely for reasons of sex. They do it because they feel like it's a way to impress others. Again, I'm not saying I like this or don't like this. It's just how it is, right? Extrinsic gets us to join or buy things. Intrinsic largely keeps us there. And so intrinsic is how much we begin to identify as somebody who does this thing. Intrinsic is being part of a community. Very, very important. Intrinsic is the deep health, is those aha moments throughout of my 72-year-old client who told me she climbed up a ladder to get something and then was at the top of the ladder and was like, well, shit, I haven't been able to climb a ladder for 20 years. And she came in and excited to tell. She's not going to join a gym because I can say I'm going to get you to be able to climb up a ladder to get something off the top shelf. But you bet your ass that's why she's staying. And so the mass desire needs to be there. Well, the mass desire has to do with aesthetics. The mass desire has to do with social equity. Like, it's just the way that it is.
Well,
And
it's
so
immediacy, right?
it's
Like
immediacy.
we struggle to empathize with our future self, right? It's hard for us to see them and feel for them and understand the impacts. And so making decisions for that person we can't empathize with is difficult. But we can empathize with the person in 90 days that has to go do this thing, and or like going to have sex with your husband and like turning the lights on freaks you out. Like, I feel for that person because that's happening soon versus, in 20 years, not being able to get off the floor, with my grandkids. Totally different things.
Yeah, a client just sends me a picture of a big mirror they bought for their bedroom. I'm like, I don't need to see that.
But yay for you.
Overshare.
Stealing.
But
Overshare.
John, this goes back.
Why is John in a corner shaking?
Right.
I just don't want to talk about it.
Kevin's like, Dad's in the shower, fully clothed, mommy. He's in the fetal position.
The water is so cold.
But John, the point I wanted to make is this goes back to the earlier parts of the book where you talked about that HAM, that human avoidance. I can't remember. You keep changing the last letter of the acronym.
The acronyms are going to change so much. Human avoidance marketing, HAM.
Okay, yeah, but so this is how you get into that position where you're saying all the wrong things to your potential market because you haven't spent enough time listening to them to know that they don't want to talk about their bone density and the frequency of fracture in their 70s, even though that's important. Up front, they want to talk about the wardrobe that they bought last summer that they can't fit this summer and how embarrassing it is for their girlfriends when they go to brunch and say, what happened to that cute dress that you bought last summer for brunches? I can't fit it. Like, that's what they care about. And if you're not paying enough attention, I've got a few coaches in our coaching protocol, and Amber, I need to see some emails about this, that I know are not observing their market, and they keep doing the same things. And every enrollment, they're like, oh, nobody's responding. And I keep saying the same thing. Are you listening to your market? Have you spent like a week or 2 weeks just following who they follow? Just listen to their language. Yeah. And that's problematic.
Buy the magazines they buy. I mean, you don't need to like what the magazine says, but magazines have, like popular magazines have mastered the structure of headlines, of desire.
Great headlines.
Because really, I mean, what are you selling? Right? What are you selling? Hope? Belief?
Right.
A fresh chance? I think that's what you're selling. So I mean, I get messages all the time, as you just alluded to, from like good people in fitness who feel beaten down, and they tell me they don't want to commute anymore. They tell me it's not working. What I'm working hard and it's not working, and um, it's it's often a result of incestual marketing practices. It's that guy did something and he seems successful. So if I'm going to be successful, I need to do that same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to get over that because it's what we see. We're in these groups. I mean, I fantasize and fetishize about what it was like to operate a business before the internet for no other reason than you just didn't see it. All the
Right.
stuff existed. All the same stuff existed. You just didn't see it. And so you had to figure it out by yourself and make mistakes and test. And I think it's better now, but I think it's also created a whole host of new problems where we actually have to build in blockers so that we don't see these things often when we're building. We need to figure out how to, yes, take some best practices, figure out when the ideas are good. And often that's coming from sources that are tangentially related to your client, but don't actually serve the same clients as yours.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Mm-hmm.
when you follow Brene Brown as an example. So I mean, speaks to the same type of person that Ren speaks to, but for a different purpose, because then what Ren can absorb is language, terminology, phrasing, desires, and then he can read the comments, which is where the real gold is.
That's where it's at.
And he can look at what real people who are working on these things are saying. Right. Where do I want to go here?
I don't know. As you think, may I ramble something really quickly? Something I think is important. Just on the
go
social media, on the social media tip. Like I want people out there who think that they need social media for their business structure to gain clients. If you're going to do that, you got to realize something about people with big accounts that are fairly general. Because you might hear what we say here, and you might say, well, Jordan Syatt talks to everybody, or Sohee Lee, or Carpenter now, talks to everybody. And what you have to realize about people who speak in generalities that have really big accounts, typically one of three things happen. Either A, they were an early adopter to Instagram or Facebook. Like they just kind of beat the market rush there. Like they started there earlier and captured so much of the market. B,
did they build up their audience doing the thing they're doing now?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
In both of those cases you mentioned, the answer is unequivocally no.
Jordan was all about like Harry Potter stuff. He was constantly talking and explaining things in Harry Potter language. That was the only reason I followed him, was because of that, because it made me laugh.
He was the first person to do infographics.
Mm-hmm.
He built up the vast majority of his Instagram following by producing infographics. They popped off one day. He figured it out early, and he just started cranking on this shit.
Rode the wave.
And rode the wave. And then everybody started copying him. But he figured that out. And then he figured out that challenges can get like media attention, like, hey, I think he ate McDonald's for 30 days and did
lots of shit. But
yeah.
I want to get the other 2 points though,
but
John,
he also spent like 4 or 5 hours a day for years
creating content
and engaging on content, earning $0.
The other thing that's happened when you see a large generalized account is B, they have a remarkable physique. There's something aesthetically remarkable about that person, and they lean into it hard, right? Abs are always out, ass is always out, sports bra, perky boobs are pressed up against like that. That's B. And the third thing is they're just an outright liar. They will just say anything for any reason just to get some likes, to sell you any shit that comes by. They'll endorse any product. They just don't care. So when you're trying to build your business now, based off what you see those people with generalized accounts doing, understand that either they got there first, either they are remarkably good looking, probably, right? And leaning into that, or C, they just don't give a shit what they say about anything. As long as it drives the likes, as long as people buy it,
Right.
they don't care. You're not going to win that way anymore. You have to dial in to who you're talking to. I digress.
Yeah. I mean, um, overly sexualized aesthetic fitness Instagram accounts. I mean, they're entertainer accounts, right? For the most part, there are examples that oppose this, but for the most part, if you look at them, their engagement is basically nothing, and they have no real ability to sell stuff. The outliers are almost always, I'm thinking about like Jeff Nippard and stuff like that, although his isn't like sexualized, but like the outliers often are YouTubers. Like they're YouTubers that have a big Instagram page, but they're like YouTubers. And so they've been delivering value on YouTube for a lot of time, and they don't necessarily like deliver value on Instagram, but it's because they're doing it in other places that you might not see. That often happens, or it's just complete and utter, just dumb bullshit. Which, I mean, look, it sells. It does, Dave Asprey. Like you can sell stuff by making up a whole bunch of things, or taking. I mean, there was somebody who worked for me for a period of time that came to work for me after he worked for Dave Asprey, and his job with Bulletproof was to read the studies, and find studies to back up the claims.
Mm-hmm.
And he would tell me, Dave was coming out with a product, and he's like, find research to back up the product. Like it wasn't the other way around. And he would say, he's like, there's no research to back this up. He's like, just grab some. Nobody reads this shit. Just like find a whole bunch of stuff. It just didn't care. Just did not care at all. He just needed a whole bunch of scientific references, knowing that the few people who actually read them, if they said anything, it was just completely irrelevant, because the proof of having a study outweighed what the study actually said. Like in some cases, the studies even opposed what he was saying.
Right.
That's just the way it is, unfortunately. Again, don't like whatever. You can like it or not like it. I guess the truth, I don't know. I guess the truth about marketing is that I want to put across. One of the main take-home messages here is that it's kind of all a fabrication at the end of the day. There's no objective reality. There's no facts that really move the needle. I mean, there obviously are facts, but there's no facts that like actually move the needle. I mean, it's stories, not facts, that make sales. And there's also no best products. Like even if there is a best product, well, the vast majority of consumers don't need the best of anything anyway. I mean, I think back to my university life. I studied kinesiology, and first year general physiology class, there was 1,500 people. So in the 101 level class, there was 1,500 people. Year 4, advanced muscle physiology, had 15. It's like there's always going to be way more people who need just okay products and information than there's going to be people who are going to like go out of the way to find like the best. And so if you build a business, I mean, Adam Bornstein is a good example of this, talking about ladder. You don't build a business for the maximizers of a thing. You might tell a story around that well, but the product, there's no best products. I mean, maybe there used to be in a world where there wasn't decentralization of a lot of production. Mm-hmm. Like anybody can self-publish, anybody has a media studio in their phone, anybody can call up a supplement manufacturer and look through their pamphlet and get supplements manufactured in pretty low product runs and slap their label on it. Like it's not hard to do. And then send it to a fulfillment center and integrate with many of the softwares that already exist that link into Shopify, and boom, you have your store that's fully integrated in like a week. It's not hard to do any of this stuff. And so all that really matters then are perceptions in the minds of customers, of prospects. Again, like I will reinforce this. Do I like this? Do I think that this is good? I don't think I do. But I also have been given enough evidence to believe that that's the way it is. And so what I like or what I don't like is kind of irrelevant, and I can choose to play the game or I can choose to opt out of the game, and I think both are perfectly reasonable decisions. What's fair or not fair, we can shout about it as much as we want. We can make arguments based off of research, whatever we want. But the marketplace has its own reality. And so going back to that first line, kind of to bring this full circle, because Amber and I have a call about Quick Coach, so we got to end on time. Going back to that first quote from Earl Nightingale, the amount of money we make is a direct relation of three things, if you recall: the demand for what we do, our ability to do it, and how difficult it would be to replace us. I think the third part is the most important. How difficult is it really to replace us? I think the secret of competition, of market saturation, is that if you go into it thinking that you're competing, I think you've already lost. I think that the entire idea of becoming the obvious choice is you render competition obsolete. You're not even in the same conversation as them. By the time that things like paid advertisements and content to people who have never met that person, who have no existing connection to that person, by the time that those things convert, all of the obvious choices have already been chosen. You just don't see that happening. You're blind to it. And you think about your own purchase habits. I mean, the only reason that you ever buy stuff from people or products or things from like Google searches or randomly is in situations or cases where you don't already know and trust somebody or something in that space. If you do, you don't even look. Like you just don't even, you don't Google, you don't look. I mean, it's just kind of the way that it is. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with paid ads. I don't think there's anything wrong with content. But the truth of the matter is the vast majority of purchases aren't the result of ads, aren't the result of content, because long before they were ready to take action, they've already made their choice. And that's why I think that, yeah, sure, if you're looking in the great general pool where everybody else is and you're practicing these incestual marketing practices, yeah, you're going to compete and it's going to be hella hard. And quite frankly, you probably don't stand a chance. Neither do I. It's just, it's a developing world economy. There's going to be a few winners who are going to win massively big, and then everybody else is going to be scrapping it. Any closing thoughts, guys?
If you would remember to talk about our wonderful sponsor, I will prompt you for that. We got on a roll today.
Thank you to Unbound Marina for sponsoring the Obvious Choice podcast. They are the obvious choice in my mind for clothing. I love their t-shirts. It's my one shirt. We got 10% off your first order. I think coupon code Goodman. The link's in the description of the show, where if you listen to podcasts, or just go to unboundmerino.com and use coupon code Goodman. And I really do love the company. I love the people associated with it. It's not just because they paid us. I was buying their clothing 6 years ago before they paid me anything. There you go. Anything else, Ever? I got to recommend one. Okay. If you're looking for another episode to listen to right now because you cannot get enough of the Obvious Choice podcast, well, thank you very much. Happy to hear that. I'm going to recommend you check out episode 60. It's called The One About Content. And it kind of goes deeper if you thought that part of this conversation was a little bit interesting or you wanted a bit more on it, like tactically, like how to approach it. How to strategically use content. I think that you will very much enjoy episode 60. It's probably not what you think. I'm not going to tell you how to pick the best headlines or match your reels. What I'm going to do is show you how to use content right for you at this stage in your business and how that changes in the seasons of your business. And it's going to give you a lot of clarity, I hope, and it's going to reduce a lot of anxiety into how to get the most out of using content. So that's episode 60, the one about content. And as always, please rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, however the heck you do that. I don't know how to, but if you know how to, please rate and review this podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Nice.